Canada just made a massive move that's reshaping North American trade, and it's sending shockwaves through the political landscape. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada is removing most of its retaliatory tariffs against the United States, effective September 1st. But this isn't just another trade adjustment. This is a calculated gamble that could either secure Canada's economic future or hand Donald Trump his biggest victory yet. And Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is absolutely furious about it.
Promised elbows up before the election. He's been elbows down since. He promised a deal by July 21st. He secured no deal. He said he could, quote unquote, handle Donald Trump and negotiate a win. Yet since Mark Carney became Prime Minister, tariffs have doubled on Canadian industries. Regrettably, Mr. Carney's weakness has now encouraged the Chinese government to come after us with higher tariffs on our farmers and fish harvesters.
The opposition leader didn't mince words, accusing Carney of showing extraordinary weakness on the world stage and breaking his biggest campaign promise. According to Poilievre, the Prime Minister, who promised to stand up to Trump with elbows up, has now mysteriously lost those elbows entirely. He points to Carney's failure to secure a deal by his self-imposed July 21st deadline, and now Canadian industries are facing doubled tariffs from the United States, while China has added new tariffs of their own. So what's really happening here? Why did Canada blink first? And what does this mean for the future of North American trade? To understand this seismic shift, we need to rewind to how we got into this trade war in the first place. The story begins with Donald Trump's return to the White House in January 2025. Even before his inauguration, Trump had been signaling his intention to impose sweeping new tariffs on Canadian goods. Days after being sworn in, Trump delivered on that promise with Executive Order 293, slapping a crushing 25% tax on Canadian exports to the United States. The only exceptions were energy, critical minerals, and potash, which faced a still substantial 10% rate. These tariffs took effect on March 4th, and Canada's response was swift and decisive. Under then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Canada immediately fired back with counter tariffs on $60 billion worth of American goods. It was a bold move, one that positioned Canada as one of the few countries willing to stand toe-to-toe with Trump's protectionist agenda. The Canadian tariffs targeted everything from orange juice to motorcycles, creating a tit-for-tat trade war that economists warned would hurt consumers on both sides of the border. But then something changed. Mark Carney became Prime Minister, and the dynamics of this trade dispute shifted dramatically. Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor and Bank of England governor, brought a different approach to the negotiating table. Where Trudeau had been defiant, Carney appeared more pragmatic. And that pragmatism just led to one of the most controversial decisions of his young tenure as Prime Minister. On August 22nd, following what Carney described as a productive phone call with Trump, Canada announced it would be removing retaliatory tariffs on most U.S. goods that comply with the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA. This represented a massive scaling back of Canada's trade retaliation, affecting billions of dollars worth of trade. The scope of this reversal is staggering. Starting September 1st, American products like orange juice, peanut butter, craft beer, ketchup, coffee pods, refrigerators, washing machines, microwaves, lawnmowers, denim jeans, running shoes, bicycles, lipstick, cosmetics, toothpaste, paper towels, and bed sheets will no longer face Canadian tariffs. These are everyday items that Canadian consumers use regularly, and their prices should drop as a result. But here's the critical detail. Canada is not removing all its retaliatory tariffs. The government is maintaining 25% duties on U.S. steel, aluminum, and automobiles, the same sectors where Trump continues to impose his own tariffs on Canadian goods. This selective approach reveals the strategic thinking behind Carney's decision. Carney's justification for this move centers on what he calls matching American tariff policy. Since the United States clarified that it would not impose tariffs on Canadian goods that comply with CUSMA rules, Canada decided to reciprocate by removing its own tariffs on CUSMA-compliant American products. Percent of our trade is tariff-free, Carney emphasized during his announcement, suggesting that this move preserves what he called a unique advantage for Canada-US trade relations. The Prime Minister argued that the retaliatory tariffs had become a sticking point in negotiations with Washington, and that removing them was in Canada's economic interest. But the political reaction to Carney's decision has been fierce, and it's coming from multiple directions. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre didn't hold back in his criticism, calling the move yet another capitulation and climbdown by Mark Carney. In what has become his signature style, Poilievre delivered perhaps his most cutting line: "His elbows have mysteriously gone missing." This was a direct reference to Carney's earlier campaign rhetoric about Canada needing to put its elbows up in dealing with Trump. Poilievre characterized the decision as showing weakness on the international stage and accused Carney of breaking his biggest election campaign promise. The criticism isn't limited to political opponents. Within Canada's own industrial sectors, there's significant pushback from those who see the counter-tariffs as essential protection. Catherine Cobden, president and CEO of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, called the removal of counter-tariffs a disappointment, arguing that reciprocal tariffs protect Canada's industries and workers during this trade war. Marty Warren, national director of the United Steelworkers, was even more direct in his criticism, stating that the federal government must remain steadfast in working to not only safeguard and protect Canadian workers, but aggressively build Canadian economic resiliency. The business community's reaction has been mixed, revealing the complex economic calculations at play. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business welcomed the move, with President Corinne Pullman noting that many small business owners have told us that Canada's retaliatory measures were almost as damaging as the U.S. tariffs themselves. According to CFIB data, 58% of small businesses said they were hurt by Canada's retaliatory tariffs, and 67% reported paying the full tariffs on U.S. imports. This suggests that Canada's own tariffs were creating significant costs for Canadian businesses that rely on American inputs. From Trump's perspective, this appears to be a clear victory. The White House welcomed Canada's decision, calling it long overdue, and expressing readiness to continue discussions on trade and national security concerns. Trump himself seemed pleased with the development, telling reporters that it was nice of Carney to withdraw the Canadian tariffs and that he likes Carney a lot. This positive response from Trump suggests that Canada's gamble might be paying off in terms of improving the tone of bilateral relations. But here's where the story gets more complex. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc traveled to Washington last week, his first visit since July, to meet with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. While LeBlanc characterized their conversation as constructive, he was clear that the two countries are not on the verge of having an agreement. Instead, the meeting helped us move forward in the sense that we better understood the work that remains to be done. This suggests that while the tariff removal might have improved the atmosphere for negotiations, substantial work remains to resolve the underlying trade disputes. The timing of this decision is particularly significant given the broader context of North American trade relations. The CUSMA agreement is scheduled for review in 2026, and both countries are already preparing for what could be intensive renegotiations. Carney announced that Canada will begin industry consultations in September to prepare for this review, suggesting that the current tariff moves are part of a broader strategy to position Canada advantageously for those talks. The Prime Minister emphasized that while Canada is removing tariffs on CUSMA-compliant goods, discussions will intensify to address trade challenges in strategic sectors still impacted by tariffs. What makes this situation even more intriguing is the economic pressure both countries are facing from their own trade policies. Canadian businesses have been caught in the crossfire, paying tariffs on American inputs while trying to remain competitive. American companies, meanwhile, are dealing with higher costs due to Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods. Economic analysts suggest that both sides have incentives to find a resolution, but the political dynamics make that challenging. As Avery Schenfeld, chief economist with Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, noted, the retaliatory tariffs haven't added much to Canadian inflation or deterred the Trump administration from imposing tariffs on Canada, but we could benefit by dropping them if the T helps win some concessions on U.S. tariffs on Canada. The broader implications of this trade dispute extend far beyond tariffs. For Canada, this represents a fundamental challenge to its economic model, which has been built around deep integration with the American economy. 3/4 of Canada's merchandise exports go to the United States, led by oil and gas, and exports represent about 1/3 of Canada's gross domestic product. This level of dependence means that any significant disruption to Canada-US trade relations has massive implications for Canadian prosperity. At the same time, Canada is a crucial market for American exporters, purchasing about $440 billion in U.S. goods and services last year, more than any other country. The political calculus behind Carney's decision becomes clearer when viewed through this economic lens. By removing tariffs on CUSMA-compliant goods, Canada is essentially betting that cooperation will yield better results than confrontation. This approach reflects Carney's background as a central banker, where pragmatic solutions often trump ideological positions. But it also represents a significant political risk, as it opens Carney to accusations that he's capitulating to Trump's pressure rather than standing firm on Canadian interests. Poilievre's criticism taps into deeper concerns about Canada's position in the world and its ability to defend its interests against larger powers. The Conservative leader's "missing elbows" comment resonates because it speaks to fears that Canada might be seen as weak or easily pushed around. Poilievre has consistently argued that he would take a tougher approach, maintaining retaliatory tariffs while offering to drop them only in exchange for the United States dropping its tariffs on Canada. "I would have gone to the president respectfully and said, 'You remove your tariffs, we remove ours. Let's sign an agreement that restores the great free trading relationship that our two countries had for decades,'" Poilievre argued. However, it's not clear that Poilievre's approach would be more effective. Trump has shown little inclination to negotiate from a position of equality, and his administration has consistently used economic pressure to extract concessions from trading partners. The European Union, Japan, and South Korea have all faced Trump's tariff threats and have been forced to make various concessions to secure more favorable treatment. In this context, Canada's decision to remove some tariffs might be seen as a pragmatic recognition of the realities of dealing with the Trump administration. The sectoral approach Canada is taking, keeping tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos while removing them elsewhere, reveals sophisticated strategic thinking. These are precisely the sectors where Trump has been most aggressive with his own tariffs, and they're also areas where Canada has significant industrial capacity and employment. By maintaining protection for these sectors while removing it elsewhere, Canada is trying to balance economic pragmatism with political necessity. It's a recognition that some battles are worth fighting while others might be counterproductive.
But you never know with President Trump. He could pull the carpet out from underneath us in a heartbeat like he has before, or they get rid of their tariffs, and then we'll bring the booze back into the LCBO. And if they don't, then they aren't getting any booze on our shelves.
Chris Swanger is the president and CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, and he joins me now. Hi, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Ontario Premier Doug Ford said today that the province does not have any plans to bring American alcohol back. He is taking a hard line. He says until the
Interestingly, this approach has found some support at the provincial level. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, while maintaining his ban on American alcohol in LCBO stores, has stated that if the Americans get rid of their tariffs, then Ontario will bring the booze back. This conditional stance mirrors the federal government's selective approach to tariff removal, suggesting a coordinated strategy across different levels of government. Looking ahead, the success or failure of Carney's approach will likely be measured by whether it leads to meaningful progress in resolving the broader trade dispute. The government faces pressure to show results, particularly given the criticism it's receiving from both opposition politicians and affected industries. If Canada's conciliatory approach leads to American concessions on steel, aluminum, and auto tariffs, Carney will be vindicated. If it's seen as one-sided capitulation that doesn't yield reciprocal benefits, the political costs could be severe. The international context also matters here. Canada is not the only country dealing with Trump's protectionist agenda, and how this dispute plays out could influence how other nations approach their own trade relationships with the United States. If Canada's cooperative approach yields positive results, it might encourage other countries to adopt similar strategies. If it's seen as rewarding American economic aggression without securing meaningful concessions, it could embolden Trump to take even tougher positions with other trading partners. What's particularly striking about this situation is how it reflects broader changes in the global trading system. The post-World War II order, built around multilateral institutions and rules-based trade, is under significant strain. Trump's approach to trade relations, using tariffs as weapons and treating trade as a zero-sum competition, represents a fundamental challenge to this system. Canada's response, whether successful or not, is helping to define how middle powers navigate this new reality. The domestic political implications in Canada are also significant. Carney's decision represents a major test of his leadership and his ability to manage Canada's most important bilateral relationship. His background as a technocrat and his reputation for competence are central to his political brand, but they also make him vulnerable to accusations that he's not tough enough in defending Canadian interests. The missing elbows critique from Poilievre is designed to exploit exactly this vulnerability. As we look toward the future, several key questions remain unanswered. Will Trump reciprocate Canada's conciliatory gesture with meaningful concessions of his own? Can Carney successfully negotiate agreements on the remaining contentious sectors? And will Canadian voters see this approach as smart pragmatism or dangerous weakness? The answers to these questions will likely determine not only the future of Canada-US trade relations, but also the political fortunes of both Carney and Poilievre.
I would have negotiated from a position of strength. I would have passed immediately a sovereignty act, which would rapidly build up our pipelines, ports, LNG plants, nuclear plants to get markets outside of the North America. I would have unleashed home building to bring a sector that is trade-proof, because most of the materials, all of the labor and land, are right here in Canada. And I would have gone to our American friends and said, here's the deal that we offer. We will massively build up our military, secure our borders, stop the fentanyl and the drugs. In exchange, and we can do more and better on all those things if we have free and open trade that enriches both of our countries. But I would never have done what Carney did, which is make a bunch of chest-pounding threats and then back down from every single one of them.
Poilievre has outlined his alternative vision for handling these negotiations, proposing to pass a sovereignty act, build critical infrastructure including pipelines, ports, LNG plants, and nuclear facilities, unleash home building, and negotiate from a position of strength. He argues Canada should offer military buildup and enhanced border security in exchange for free trade, even suggesting he would work across party lines to secure a fair deal for Canada. What's clear is that this trade dispute represents more than just an economic disagreement. It's a test of how democracies respond to economic pressure from larger powers, how political leaders balance pragmatism with principle, and how countries maintain their sovereignty while acknowledging their economic interdependence. Canada's decision to remove most of its retaliatory tariffs is a significant moment in this larger story, one that will have implications far beyond the immediate trade relationship between these two North American neighbors. The ultimate irony might be that in a dispute supposedly about trade deficits and economic fairness, the real stakes are political and strategic. For Trump, extracting concessions from Canada serves broader goals of demonstrating American power and his own effectiveness as a negotiator. For Carney, managing this relationship while maintaining domestic political support requires a delicate balance between cooperation and strength. And for Canada as a country, this dispute is fundamentally about how to maintain prosperity and sovereignty in an increasingly complex and challenging world. The removal of these tariffs might be just the beginning of a much larger negotiation about the future of North America. As both countries prepare for the 2026 CUSMA review and navigate the immediate challenges of their current trade dispute, the decisions made today will shape the economic relationship between Canada and the United States for years to come.